Did he really think she was just a delivery girl? Did he really throw her out in front of 40 soldiers, without even asking her name? He did. And 90 seconds later, that one cruel mistake began to destroy everything he had built. In 15 years of service, people had called me many things. Lieutenant. Ma'am. Officer. Hey, you. I had been ignored before. I had been tested before. I had been underestimated more times than I could count. But never like this. Never with a full colonel pointing at the door in front of a room full of soldiers, telling me to wait outside like I was some lost courier who had walked into the wrong building. He had no idea what was in my bag. He had no idea what was in my orders. And he had no idea that his whole world was about to crack open because he looked at me and decided I was too small to matter. The sound of the helicopter still shook inside my ears when I stepped off the Black Hawk and onto the hot ground at Fort Redstone. Dust swirled around my boots. For 1 second, I just stood there and looked. I had spent 3 weeks reading reports about this place, but paper never tells you how a base really feels. Real places breathe. Real places warn you. This one smelled like fuel, wet grass, and a storm that had not started yet. Under my arm, I carried a dark leather case. Around the clasp was a strip of red tape. Most people on that base would never understand what that tape meant. But the people who did understand it knew one thing fast. It meant power. I was wearing a plain field uniform. No fancy signs. Nothing on me that told strangers who I really was. That was the point. My orders were simple on the outside and dangerous underneath. Report to Fort Redstone. Watch the Logistics Command under Colonel Victor Kane. Study its readiness. Study its conduct. Do not reveal your full authority until you decide the time is right. If the Pentagon thinks a commander has built a wall of fear around his people, they do not send in someone loud. They send someone quiet. They send someone who knows how to watch before a room starts acting. I had done jobs like this before, but never one this heavy. Never one with this much hanging over it. And the second I began walking across that base, I felt it. Something was wrong. Soldiers moved fast, but too fast. Too sharp. Too careful. Nobody held eye contact for long. Near the motor pool, a young corporal jumped when a door slammed somewhere behind him. He caught himself fast, straightened up, and kept walking like nothing had happened. But I saw it. That kind of fear does not come from discipline. That kind of fear comes from a person. A young first lieutenant met me at the front of the admin building. He looked about 26. He held a clipboard to his chest like it might save him from something. His eyes moved over my plain uniform, then my bag. I watched him make a quick guess about who I was. "You're with the inspection team," he said. "I'll show you where to wait. Colonel Kane doesn't like extra people in the briefing room." I did not correct him. "Not yet." "Thank you," I said. That was all. I followed him down a long hallway lined with framed photos. Medal ceremonies. Handshakes. Smiling command pictures. In almost every one, the same man stood in the center. Colonel Victor Kane. Big shoulders. Silver at his temples. A face trained to look important. The briefing room was already half full when we entered. Officers. Senior NCOs. One civilian contractor sitting stiff in the back, almost like he was trying to disappear into his chair. And at the head of the table sat Colonel Kane himself. He was reading from a folder without looking up. But even before he spoke, I noticed something else. Everyone in that room had their eyes fixed near him, not on him. It was the way people look near a fire without staring into the flames. No one had told him I was coming with real authority. That part had been very intentional. Back at the Pentagon, my handler had warned me. Kane was good at acting polished when he knew important eyes were watching. But 3 separate complaints had reached a general's desk over the last 18 months. 3. Anonymous. Quiet. careful. And all of them painted a very different picture. I stepped in softly and took a place near the wall. I only had to wait 4 seconds to see the real version of him. He looked up, saw a woman in a plain uniform he didn't know, and made his decision before asking one question. "Stand outside," he said. That was it. Not even a full glance. Just a quick order, tossed at me like I was nothing, and then his eyes dropped back to his folder as if the matter was finished. I did not move. Behind me, I heard the young lieutenant shift his weight. He did not know what to do. The whole room went still. Not calm still. Careful still. The stillness of people who know danger can grow from one wrong breath. Colonel Kane looked up again. This time his face was tighter. "I said stand outside," he repeated. "We don't need help in this briefing." A few men around the table gave weak little laughs. Not real laughs. Fear laughs. The kind people force out when a powerful man speaks, because staying silent feels even riskier. I watched who laughed. I also watched who did not. Near the window, one sergeant kept his eyes on the table. His jaw was tight enough to crack stone. He said nothing. I said nothing too. Because silence can be stronger than a fight, if you use it at the right moment. Instead of answering, I walked forward. Slowly. My boots were the only sound in the room. Then I placed my leather case on the long table with calm, careful hands. I opened it. Every eye followed me. I took out one sealed folder. Red tape stretched across the edge. This time, Colonel Kane did look fully up. I slid the folder across the table until it stopped right in front of him. "These are your orders, Colonel." My voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. A soft voice makes people lean in. And leaning in is its own kind of surrender. For 1 second, nobody moved. Colonel Kane stared at the folder like it had fallen out of the sky. I could almost see his mind racing. He had already decided who I was. Some helper. Some admin body. Some extra pair of hands sent to carry papers for people who actually mattered. Now that same extra body had just put a sealed order from far above his command on his table. He looked at me. Then at the folder. Then back at me. I think part of him still wanted to believe this was a mistake. That I had the wrong bag. The wrong file. The wrong room. Men like him cling hard to the version of the world that keeps them in control. Finally, pride pushed him to touch it. He broke the seal. He unfolded the pages. He started reading. I watched his eyes move down the first paragraph. Then stop. Then move back up and read it again, slower this time. His face changed before he said a word. That was the moment. That was when certainty left him. The muscles around his mouth twitched. One of his hands curled along the edge of the paper as if he suddenly needed something solid to hold on to. Around the room, heads began to rise. Officers who had spent the whole briefing staring at their own notes began stealing looks at him. The air shifted. Animals feel storms before thunder starts. People do too. I let him read the whole thing. The letterhead. The signature. The authority. The part that placed this inspection, and everything tied to it, directly under my control. Not as an assistant. Not as a silent observer. Not as a note-taker. I was Major Quinn Mercer. And I had been sent because 3 complaints about this base had stayed alive long enough at the highest level that someone finally decided quiet eyes were needed. I wasn't there to carry files. I was the one who would decide what happened next. Colonel Kane lowered the pages very slowly, like they had become heavier in his hands. When he looked up again, even his posture had changed. His chin was no longer tilted with that easy command. His shoulders looked stiffer now. "Major," he said, finding my rank very quickly now that he needed it. "Please. Sit. We can start this properly." I didn't realize. "I know you didn't," I said. I still did not sit. There is a kind of mercy in not making a moment bigger than it already is. But there is also justice in not letting a man erase what he just did because the room has changed around him. He had made his choice in the first 4 seconds. That mattered. Let's continue exactly the way you planned 5 minutes ago, I said. Then I pulled out the chair at the far end of the table. The chair no one had offered me. I sat down without waiting for permission from anyone. Colonel Kane stood there for half a breath longer, still holding the folder, still trying to understand what kind of morning he was now trapped inside. Then he sat too. For the first time since I entered, he did not look at me like I was in the wrong place. He looked at me like a man who suddenly realized someone important had been watching him from the very first second. The room stayed frozen until he cleared his throat. "We'll proceed with the briefing," he said. But his voice had lost something. "Wait." I opened my notebook. I uncapped my pen. And I wrote down the very first truth I learned at Fort Redstone. Not one person in that room had looked surprised by the way Colonel Kane had spoken to me. That told me more than any speech ever could. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Kane dismissed everyone in a tone he was trying hard to keep even. I stayed in my chair and watched the room empty. No one lingered near him. No one stepped close to ask follow-up questions. No one smiled. No one relaxed. They got out fast. That is the difference between respect and fear. Respect keeps people near you. Fear makes people leave the second they are allowed to. I did not attack him that first day. Real investigations are not built on dramatic speeches. They are built on patience. If a place has spent years hiding the truth, you do not rip the curtain down in one loud move. You watch. You ask. You wait. I told Colonel Kane I would need access to logistics files, training records, equipment lists, and personnel files going back 2 years. I told him I would interview people alone, at times of my choosing. No schedule approved by his office. No babysitter sitting in the corner. He did not like that. I saw the protest rise in his face, then die there. He remembered the folder. Over the next 3 days, I moved through Fort Redstone like water through cracks. The official records told one story. Equipment counts matched the manifests. Training hours were neat. Too neat. Every number lined up so perfectly it almost felt polished by hand. Budget figures balanced, but only if you looked quickly. If you followed the decimals long enough, some lines did not fit. Not enough to scream. Enough to whisper. And whispers, over time, become patterns. But paper only shows you what someone decided to write down. People show you what happened. If they trust you. I started with Staff Sergeant Marcus Bell. 22 years in uniform. 6 months from retirement. The kind of man who had learned exactly how much truth he could safely afford in any room. We met in a supply shed that smelled like oil and cardboard. He turned a socket wrench in his hands while I asked the question straight. "How does this place really run under Colonel Kane?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he gave me a tired look. "Ma'am, with respect, nobody who asked me that before ever did anything with the answer." "I'm not most people who asked before," I said. He studied me like he was weighing hope against risk. That is a hard weight to carry. Finally, he set the wrench down. "Nobody ever listens," he said softly. "You report it. It goes up the chain. Then somehow it comes back down changed. Or it vanishes. Colonel Kane has friends. People owe him favors. People here learned a long time ago that the fastest way to get hurt is to be the first one who speaks." That word sat in my chest. Hurt. Not annoyed. Not punished. Hurt. I asked what he meant, but he only shook his head. "Not yet." I did not push him. Men like Marcus Bell do not open because you force them. They open because they decide they can survive telling the truth. So I waited. And I kept walking. In the days that followed, the same story came to me from different mouths in different corners of the base. A young specialist whose career file had been nearly poisoned after she asked one honest question during a meeting. A civilian logistics worker who had seen equipment requests approved for units that did not seem to need them, and who had been told very clearly not to ask where the extra equipment went. A lieutenant who admitted, off the record, that promotion at Fort Redstone seemed to depend less on good work and more on whether you had ever embarrassed Colonel Kane. No single story was enough by itself. That is how men like him survive. Not by one giant crime. By 100 smaller wrongs. By 100 quiet compromises. By making sure every piece alone looks explainable, while the whole picture stays hidden. On the third night, I sat alone in my temporary quarters with a legal pad covered in names, dates, half-finished lines, and questions that would not leave me. And somewhere in that quiet room, I understood something deeper. I had not been sent to look at one difficult colonel. I had been sent to look at a whole base that had learned silence was safer than truth. And that changed the shape of my job. I did not just need evidence. I needed trust. By the fourth day, Colonel Kane had stopped acting like I was a small problem he could politely outwait. I saw it first in delays. Records I requested started arriving late. 1 hour became half a day. Half a day became a full one. Always with smooth little excuses. The system is down. The clerk is out sick. Those files are in archive storage. Then officers who had agreed to talk suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Interesting timing. I still said nothing. A man like Kane, if cornered too early, will start burning evidence before you can catch the smoke. Better to let him believe he is still controlling the board. Pressure reveals character. Pressure shows habits. Pressure makes hidden systems move. By the end of that week, his pressure campaign had grown teeth. Word reached me through the same quiet channels that had been feeding me truth. Kane had started making calls above his level. He was describing me as young, aggressive, disrespectful, and too inexperienced to understand what real command pressure looked like. To at least one person, he suggested I had my authority because of who I knew, not what I had earned. I had heard that poison before. Women in uniform hear it in different shapes all the time. She got lucky. She had help. She knew the right people. She didn't earn it the way a man would have. I let it pass through me. Because every time a man wastes his strength trying to explain away my presence, he is really confessing fear. And people were watching. That was the part he had missed. On the 6th evening, after most of the base had gone quiet, Major Elena Cruz found me near the motor pool. She did not waste time. She pressed a flash drive into my hand. "I've had that for over a year," she said. I was too afraid to come forward alone. She looked me right in the eye. But after what I saw in that briefing room, I thought maybe the time had come. The drive held deleted logistics records. Equipment requests approved by Kane for units that either barely existed or had been moved long ago. The paper trail had been cleaned from the main system, but not perfectly. Someone had forgotten what digital ghosts can still remember. 2 days later, a civilian payroll clerk named Noah Baker left an envelope in my office with no note. Inside were financial records. I cross-checked claimed training hours against gate security logs. The numbers did not just bend. They broke. Across 2 years, the false hours added up to a figure no honest person could call a simple mistake. That night, I sat under one lamp and spread the records across my desk. Requisitions. Payroll lines. Security logs. Dates. Signatures. Corrections. Missing units. Inflated orders. False hours. And the picture sharpened. This was not neglect. Neglect is sloppy. This was careful. This was built slowly, one small, defendable lie at a time, until the lies became a structure strong enough to hold a whole command in fear. Maybe Kane told himself it was not that bad. Men like him often do. Maybe he told himself everyone did a little of this. Maybe he told himself results mattered more than methods. Maybe he believed fear was simply efficiency in a harder form. But the more I found, the more people began coming forward. That surprised me most. I expected fear to tighten as the investigation deepened. Instead, something else moved through that base. Relief. Small at first. Then growing. Relief is a strange thing. It does not always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like a door unlocking inside a tired face. Marcus Bell came back to me on the 7th night without being called. He brought no file this time. Just his voice. He told me about a training accident 2 years earlier. A young private got hurt badly. But the report had been changed. Reclassified. Smoothed over. Because if the truth had been filed honestly, it would have raised ugly questions about who was really running that exercise and why corners had been cut. I wrote everything down. Meanwhile, Colonel Kane was still trying to polish the surface. He still made calls. Still defended himself. Still told people I did not understand how real commands worked under pressure. He had no idea the floor under him was already breaking apart. The senior inspection team arrived on the 10th morning. 2 colonels and a civilian from the Inspector General's office. The second they entered, Fort Redstone changed its posture. Fresh touch-up paint. Clean tables. Records laid out like they had always been available. The whole base suddenly looked eager, tidy, and ready. It was theater. And Colonel Kane knew exactly how to act in it. He met them in dress uniform, metals bright in the morning light, voice calm, smile measured. He opened the first meeting by giving a clean summary of readiness. On the surface, it sounded solid. Then he turned to me. He framed me carefully. An officer who had misunderstood operational reality. An inspector who had disrupted morale. Someone too aggressive. Someone who had come in with a decision already made. I let him speak. I did not interrupt once. Then I began laying out folders. One by one. Major Cruz's deleted requisition records. Noah Baker's payroll evidence. Security logs cross-checked against claimed training hours. Email chains between Kane's office and a supply contractor that showed inflated equipment orders well beyond what this base could possibly need. Sworn statements from soldiers and staff who had finally spoken in private. Each file alone was troubling. Together, they became a map. A map of deliberate abuse. A map of fraud. A map of fear used as a tool. I watched the faces around the table change as they read. I watched the civilian liaison stop writing and simply listen. There comes a moment when a story no longer needs help being believed. Colonel Kane tried one more time. His voice rose a little. He said logistics work is messy. He said any base this size has irregularities. He said I had picked the darkest possible meaning from normal friction. That was when I played the recording. I had not wanted to use it. I had wrestled with that choice. A young captain had recorded it by accident during what he thought was an off-the-record talk with Kane about morale. A phone left running. A private conversation captured without warning. But in the end, I asked myself one question. Did the words reveal the truth of the man who said them? Yes. The room filled with Colonel Kane's own voice. Calm. Clear. Certain. Fear works better than leadership, the recording said. Fear doesn't need to be earned. You just make sure it never lets up. Silence hit the room so hard it felt physical. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. And then I watched Colonel Kane break. Not with a shout. Not with a thrown chair. Not like a movie villain. Worse. Quietly. A full collapse behind the eyes. The look of a man who had spent years building a version of himself for other people to respect, and who now had to watch that version fall apart in front of the only audience he ever truly cared about. He opened his mouth. Stopped. Tried again. That was taken out of context, he said. Even he sounded like he didn't believe it. I gave him no answer. Silence was enough. By then, silence was doing all the work for me. The next afternoon, Lieutenant General Daniel Cross flew in. The moment he stepped off the aircraft, I knew the careful stage of this story was over. He had already read every document I sent up the proper chain. He had heard the recording. He had seen enough. Colonel Kane still tried to speak. Pride is stubborn even when defeat is already standing in the room. He began explaining again. Large command. Complex numbers. Morale issues everywhere. Too much blame placed on one man. General Cross cut him off before the second sentence ended. Colonel, he said. His voice was not loud. It was final. I've read the file. I've heard the recording. I do not need your interpretation. The room went still. Then came the words that ended everything. Colonel Victor Kane, your command ends today. I watched them land. You can tell when a blow reaches deeper than pride. His shoulders changed first. Then his mouth. Then his eyes. For the first time since I had arrived, he looked like a man who understood he could not talk his way around what was happening. He did not argue. Maybe part of him had known this was coming ever since the day I opened that first sealed folder and laid it in front of him. Maybe the last 10 days had been nothing but a slow walk toward the edge. He was relieved on the spot. General Cross named an interim commander from inside the base, Lieutenant Colonel Leah Stone. Not me. That mattered. I had never come to take command. I had come to see clearly enough that the right person could. Kane was escorted to collect his personal things under supervision. I did not watch him leave. There is no honor in enjoying another person's fall, even when they earned it. What I watched instead was the room. Shoulders eased. Breaths deepened. Faces softened. The air itself changed. Word spread through Fort Redstone faster than any official message ever could. By evening, soldiers I had interviewed started finding reasons to pass by the building where I was finishing reports. Some only nodded. Some stopped just long enough to whisper one thing. Thank you. That word sat strangely on me every time. Because I had not done the hardest part. They had. Marcus Bell found me outside the mess hall that night. He looked lighter than the man I met in the supply shed, like he had finally set down something heavy. Never thought I'd see the day, he said. You saw it because you spoke, I told him. That matters. He looked away for a second, like he did not know what to do with that truth. I understood. It is easier to believe rescue comes from authority than to admit change only starts when ordinary people risk telling the truth. Later that night, Major Elena Cruz found me too. Will this follow me? She asked. Coming forward like I did? Will people mark me as trouble? I could have comforted her with a pretty lie. I didn't. Yes, I said. It will follow you. But it will follow you as the officer who told the truth when it mattered. Not as someone who stayed quiet while this kept happening. Those are very different things to carry. She stood there thinking about that, turning it over inside herself. I stayed outside long after she left. The night air was cooler. The base lights glowed across the dark. And I thought about the first moment Colonel Kane pointed at the door and decided I was someone too small to count. In the end, this story had not turned on rank alone. It had turned on people. On tired people deciding the truth mattered more than the price of fear. I stayed at Fort Redstone 6 more weeks. Longer than my first orders required. The Pentagon wanted stability. They wanted to make sure new leadership had room to rebuild. If I'm honest, I wanted to see what a place looks like after fear leaves. The change was not dramatic. No giant speech. No magical healing. Real healing is quieter than that. It happened in small steps. Officers began speaking in meetings without first checking the room. The young specialist whose file had been stained for asking one question got that write-up reviewed and removed. The next week, I watched her stand in formation a little taller, as if some invisible hand had finally let go of her throat. Training logs became honest because training was actually happening. Lieutenant Colonel Leah Stone turned out to be exactly what the base needed. Patient. Direct. Steady. She did not pretend to know everything. She asked questions. She listened. She did not perform strength. She practiced it. Watching her lead reminded me of something simple. Real competence is often quiet. That is why fear so often wins the room first. Marcus Bell retired during my final week. The ceremony was small. Folding chairs. Paper cups of coffee. A framed certificate that could never hold all a man had given in 22 years. But everyone in that room knew it was not really about the frame. General Cross came back himself to give Marcus a commendation that should have been in his record long ago. When Marcus took it, his hands shook. Not from age. From being seen. From finally having the truth written where it should have been all along. Afterward, he found me by the door, still holding the frame. I keep thinking about that day, he said. The day you didn't step outside. I keep wondering what would have happened if you had. I smiled, but only a little. I've thought about it too, I said. Maybe someone else would have come later. Maybe it would have taken longer. I try not to live inside the version of things that never happened. He nodded. Then he thanked me one last time. And then he walked away toward whatever came next in a life that was finally leaving with truth instead of silence. On my last morning, while I packed near the helipad, the young lieutenant who had first walked me into that briefing room came to find me. He looked different now. Steadier. Less like a man reading the room for survival. More like a man beginning to trust his own sense of right and wrong. Ma'am, he said, hesitant. Can I ask something before you go? Of course. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were that first day? You could have saved yourself a lot of trouble. You could have told him your rank right away. I looked out across the base before answering. Because some questions deserve honesty, not speed. If I had led with my rank, I said, I would have seen the version of this place Colonel Kane wanted important people to see. I needed the truth. I needed to see what happened when nobody thought anyone important was in the room. He was quiet. Then I added the part one most wanted him to carry. If respect depends on rank, then it isn't respect. It's fear in a cleaner uniform. He did not answer right away. He didn't need to. Some truths need time. The Black Hawk lifted not long after. As Fort Redstone shrank beneath me, I looked down at a base that had spent years shaped by one man's hunger to be feared. Now it had a chance to be shaped by something harder and stronger. Honesty. Responsibility. Trust earned one day at a time. Colonel Victor Kane believed authority came from making a room go quiet. He learned too late that real authority comes from something else. It comes from character. It comes from accountability. It comes from the slow, patient work of earning people's trust instead of crushing it. I still think about that base. I think about Marcus Bell shaking hands around that frame. I think about Major Elena Cruz finally choosing truth over fear. I think about a young lieutenant learning that power and respect are not the same thing. And I think about how close all of it came to staying buried forever. If enough people had stayed silent, it would have. That is the part that stays with me most. Not the folder. Not the order. Not even the fall of a colonel. What stays with me is this. Fear can rule a room for a very long time. But the truth only needs one brave moment to start bringing it down. If this story hit your heart, stay close to the Hidden Family Revenge Stories for more powerful family drama and revenge stories. And if you want more deep, emotional twists like this on Twisted Family Revenge Storied, don't go far. Because the next story might shake you even more.